Hello, welcome. Let's get into another session today. I hope you're excited. Let's just check the technology, make sure everybody can hear me, see me, chat to me, and we will get started. Welcome to the second part of the behavior intelligence foundation, which the Leadership Intelligence Handbook is built on. Okay, and today we move. Last year we talked a lot about leadership intelligence and behavior aspects of that, and we went through most of, if not all of, actually, the COARS methodology from a leadership perspective. And now we will look at COARS from a behavior intelligence or a business intelligence side of things. So, again, thank you. Thumbs up. It looks like things are working. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. So, why is this important? Why is COARS important? Because really there are 4 stages, and the methodology is the same for many parts of what you do in business, in organizations. We use this methodology to improve different aspects. So we did it for leadership, and we have the LISA assessment. Actually, this is what you get when you do your LISA at the end. If you want to get your full report, there is over 50 pages in this report. Basically, you get your scorecard and some strategies and an 8-week plan as part of that. So it's really powerful. And we're talking first on the Calibrate piece. And Calibrate is about the self-awareness. So we will have an announcement shortly that will also look at Calibrate from now the business intelligence. But I want to finish this series first so that you actually have the insights before you do your assessments. Okay, and so without further ado, let me jump into today's session, which is really the COARS methodology, as I mentioned, around behavior intelligence as opposed to leadership intelligence. So we will be making some more announcements on that very shortly. There's a lot going on, and a lot of people ask the question, how come you're doing all these things? Where does the technology come in? Where is AI coming in? If you like your Venn diagram, you've got now 3 areas. You've got leadership, you've got your products and services, and you've got technology. And the overlay of all of these things is really critical as we move forward. But today we're talking about blind spots. So let me dive into that. What do I mean by business blind spots as opposed to leadership blind spots? We've talked about leadership blind spots. It may have been around this time last year. If you want to go back through the series, you'll find that on the biqorg.com/events, and you can access a lot of that material. It's recorded, it's available for you to be able to do that. All right. And if you want to do the workshop series, do reach out and book a time, and we will help you do that. Okay. So what happens in a lot of organizations is the narrative that really happens within the organization as people talk about it and discuss who they are. Before they realize it becomes the norm within the organization, and no one really remembers how that culture came to be. So just go back to that for a sec. So every organization has a narrative. The narrative builds inside it, not by evidence, but just by the team dynamics, the filters, the motivation. It all comes from good intention, but we're talking about the behavior that comes from that, and we'll talk about the psychology of that in business, right? We'll talk about the gap, and really this is a really important statement. When we talk about blind spots, we're not talking about what you think you don't know yet. That's just education. That's the unknown. It's what you think you know that isn't true. Okay, so that's a really important distinction, and today is really about uncovering that blind spot and going through the steps for you to do that. Okay, and we'll give you some tools to do that. By the end of the session, you'll be able to walk away with 4 quadrants that you can complete and score and actually work on removing those business blind spots. And they are behavioral driven, okay? Behavior driven. So how to identify them, your self-image, your perception filters, we'll talk about those, talk about the framework to do that, and some tools for that. More importantly, I'm going to cover 4 topics today: the invisible patterns, the perception filters, and the 4 business blind spots that you really need to pay attention to, that you need to measure and track and focus on. And ultimately, this is all about the calibrate phase of COARS, so we'll touch on that. So what are the invisible patterns? So let's start with that. Here are some examples. So when you talk about your customer experience, what is their experience? How can they experience working with you? They can only experience that through engaging with you. So that's the behavioral aspect of the customer experience. It's not about the strategy document of what you intend to do, right? That's all wonderful. And what you've mandated your team to do, also wonderful. But the reality is the client experience comes through the engagement they have with your organization, with your team. Same in-house when we talk about team culture. And I'll just throw this up quickly. How do we measure team culture? We use AccuMatch because it gives us a very clear spectrum of many behaviors that we want to understand how they impact the team culture, how they impact the customers. Understanding the communication style comes out of that. The marketing style comes out of that. There's just so much that we get from the AccuMatch map that we can't get any other way. So when we talk about culture, whether we're talking about team dynamics, the culture of the organization, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Your reputation. It's not about what you put out. It's not about your press releases, your announcements, what you're doing. Those are all internally focused. It's about the market reputation. Again, that's your behavior in the market and how the market perceives you is a behavior oriented perception. Okay. And every one of these is actually measurable, and that's what we're going to talk about. So let's dive into some of that. So what drives these individual patterns? It's very simple. This is psychologically based. Individual habits become team norms. So when you allow certain habits to go unnoticed or to be accepted and allowed, right, you start to develop a cultural norm, right? So team norms compound into departmental ones. Departmental ones become the culture of the organization. And by the time it reaches the market, nobody remembers how that got started, right? It evolves quietly, in the shadows, if you like, and becomes the elephant that you then need to manage and work through and re-engage and pull apart, if you like. So when we talk about BIQ in a business intelligence or behavior intelligence, the two things are synonymous for me. A lot of companies talk about the competitive intelligence, the competition, how they compete in the marketplace, their processes, their systems. I know we've had so many different methodologies over the years that focus on that. And, some organizations focus on EQ by itself, so they are siloed usually. They're not brought together the way BIQ does that. And so we want to make sure that we look at those. In fact, we look at conversational intelligence, we look at EQ, we look at IQ to some extent, and we look at the whole thing, and the impact of behavior is really the catalyst to whether something is going to get blocked or it will happen in your organization. So in order for you to start dealing with this, you want to ask that question, is this a communication gap or is it a behavior gap? Have we missed the boat about how we are communicating this, or is it just that we haven't considered the behavior that either empowers or blocks this, right? So you want to dive into that, take a look at your organization, name one thing your company says it values that employees would quietly disagree about, or customers for that matter. So can you measure that? Of course you can. So do the measurement to make sure that you're dealing with facts. If you haven't measured it before, it's probably a blind spot. Okay. Right. Moving on. So the filter bias or perception filters scale pretty quickly without you realizing it. So, in many organizations we see this, and you've probably done this yourself. I know I've been there, I've done it. We put out these surveys and we get the one or two negative ones, and we go, oh yeah, they're an anomaly. We're not going to worry about that. Or I know this person, I know he's like that or she's like that, and so we filter it instead of looking at it in a reality, right? Marketing departments do that. The customer feedback gets filtered through the brand ego. The marketers go, oh yeah, no, they don't understand, and yes, they actually do understand, and we're not listening because we are filtering it rather than looking at it and analyzing it and trying to understand. The data is not wrong. The lens is what's wrong. So when we look at things with our lens, our biases, our filters, we skew the results, right? So the success filter, the past wins make you blind to the current shifts in the marketplace, right? So that's a big one, right? You want to be careful of that. Just because you've been successful in the past, the market has shifted, the industry has shifted, or things have changed, and you're still sitting there going, oh yeah, we're okay, right? I'll talk about that, give you some examples in a minute. The identity filter, who you think you are blocks seeing who you've become. Okay, so you probably realize exactly what I'm talking about, right? Just because you are well grounded in your beliefs in yourself doesn't mean that that's how other people see you. Again, it's behavioral. The comfort filter, the uncomfortable truth gets softened at every reporting level. Oh, yeah, let's leave that out. Let's not share that information. This is a really good one because I was actually present for the Blockbuster crash because we approached them, we told them what was going to happen, we gave them the tools to become and shift to become a Netflix, and they refused that. The reality of that, they were just so grounded in their belief that they filtered out all of the possibility that the world was going to change. And they went under, they're gone. Kodak, a very similar example. Oh, people will always want photographs in their hands, that will never go away. Right? I'm sorry to say that. One of the biggest companies around the world at that time is gone, right? Okay. These are not intelligence failures, they are perception filters, right? So we need to be careful. The data existed, the filters block them, right? And that's why we talk about behavior in this context. We need to understand the behaviors that are impacting the business. And business intelligence isn't just about processes and systems and technology and AI. You need to really bring the behavioral understanding into your organization. So test your organization, name a strategic assumption your company has held for more than 3 years, right? Okay. If you haven't tested it and measured it, right, then it's been a filter that's active, right? So let's get it measured, get the data to support it or to dismiss it. The markets are shifting so quickly. Just the past year alone, AI and technology has exponentially changed the landscape of business. And if you're not keeping up with that, you will be left behind. It is a blind spot that you want to work on. The 4 business blind spots I touched on: brand promise versus operational realities. So when we're talking about brand and reputation, right? What your marketing team says you deliver and you do, right, is all about you. It's really not about what the customer experience and reality actually is, right? So this gap is the fastest way to lose your business, to lose a lot of money, lose the trust. When you lose the trust, you lose business, you lose the repetition, and that's critical. So measure it. Compare your brand messaging to your actual Net Promoter Score verbatims, right? Check the data, listen, okay? We're starting to see some organization actually act on their Net Promoter Scores. So many companies send you these NPS surveys, you score it poorly, nothing happens, right? Now, occasionally I'm seeing a company actually go, oh, how come you scored us? Can I help you? Can I do something? Let me learn about that. Let's figure out what we did wrong so we don't do it again. So actually listening to the market is critical, right? So the internal culture, is what you say inside your organization that shows up in the culture, but their experience of that is going to be different from what you think needs to happen. So if you don't measure it, you don't know, So high turnover, really good example there. You think you've got a strong brand or a strong reputation. You believe that you treat your team well, but is it a blind spot? Have you measured it? Have you actually tracked it, right? Culture happens when leadership isn't watching, okay? Pay attention to that last bullet point. Okay? So your market position versus customer perception is really that measurement that you want to pay attention to, because it's your brand without you realizing that it's your brand. You think you're portraying your brand, but the world will see your reputation through their lens, not your lens, right? Okay. So where you think you sit in the marketplace versus where customers actually place you. Okay. Most companies overestimate their differentiation, or we've done this so many times, it's crazy, right? It's from good intention showing up as the wrong behavior. I talk about that quite often, right? If you can't articulate the difference your customers agree with, right, then you don't have one, right? Your differentiation doesn't exist if it doesn't get measured and tracked and compared to the reality out there. So intention is not reality. We all have great intentions, but when we do the wrong things, we get what we deserve, right? And so we need to be careful of the behavior, not the intention. Okay, what's the strategy? Okay, what actually gets done? Every unrealized strategy is a behavior gap. It's a blind spot, right? It's not a planning gap. It's a behavioral gap. If you built a great strategy and you then did all the planning, and then you go from quarter to quarter and it's not being realized, and you're having to revisit that every single time, then you're looking at the wrong thing. Okay, the old addict of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's just insane, right? Okay. So look at the timeline, look at the strategy, look at the implementation, and now let's get into a little bit of measuring and scoring yourself. So if you want to go through your score, your 4 blind spots, okay, and the lowest score is your highest leverage opportunity. So compare it with your COARS compass from the earlier webinar. Okay. How am I doing for time? Good. All right. So why Calibrate is first in COARS is because you can't observe what you haven't acknowledged exists. Okay. So first, you need to remove your lens, your filters, and say, okay, wow, this is real. Okay. And once you acknowledge that, then you can start to analyze. So we can't move to the observe, which is the O in COARS. We start with Calibrate because it's critical as the foundation to remove our biases, right? Recognize that we are human, we're going to do this, and it's behavioral oriented. You can't adapt, which comes after the O, it's the A, okay, what you haven't measured. First, you need to measure these things. You can't restructure, which is the R, if you don't do that. And you can't scale if you don't follow the methodology. So it's a psychological framework, guys. I can't put it any other way, but it impacts business processes, technology, people, culture, recruiting. It's right through your whole organization. So when we start looking at the baselines, start with the 4 areas, right? Your brand audit. Okay, what's the customer survey and employee survey saying? Are you asking the same question of both so that you get the internal perception as well as the external perception about your brand? Okay, that's how you do a brand audit. All right. The culture reality check. Measure what gets rewarded is really a good way of doing that versus what gets paid. And we've talked about that in previous sessions. The rewards don't necessarily have to be always monetary rewards, that it's what gets recognized publicly. Go back and have a look at some of those sessions. The market perception. Ask customers to describe you in 3 words, right? And compare that to your positioning. That's such a simple thing that you can do. And instead of just asking for reviews all the time, why don't you find out where you stand first so that you can adjust that before getting a whole bunch of negative reviews, right? Okay. Or misaligned reviews that talk about you in a context that isn't your intended brand message that you want to put out there. So these are really simple things that you can do. Execution tracker, compare strategic priorities to actual time and resource allocation. So take a good measure of that and track it, see how well you do with that. Are you being realistic or impatient with some of the strategies that you want to put out because you just think it's simple, it's easy, but it deals with people and behavior, and those things will get in the way of the timeline that you set and the resources you apply to it. Are you applying the right resources, or are you just throwing technology at it? Are you taking time to educate and support? All of these things. So, your Calibrate scorecard is really so important. It's the foundation, and that's why Calibrate is first, right? So take a 1 page, draw your 4 quadrants, right, and score yourself on those 4 areas. And update it quarterly. Check it quarterly. Where are we at? How are we measuring? Did we get the right results in those 4 areas, right? It's shared with leadership and the team right through your organization. It's not just a report that you discuss at the executive level and go, oh, what are we going to do? Maybe we need to run more workshops. No, share it right through. If everybody knows what the challenge is, they can all participate. Think of it as, if you've got one person pushing the wheelbarrow, if you like, versus multiple people, how light is that from a workload point of view? Maybe that's not the best example, but it's the only one that popped into my head. So, all right, so work on that. Start with your COARS. You can do your leadership LISA assessment and draft your scorecard. So pick 1 quadrant from your 4 blind spots and write down what your organization says about that area, write down what the evidence is telling you, and look at the distance in between, and look at it not just from a technology solution. There are behavioral aspects that we tend to forget about. I'm having discussions with organizations right now that want us to help them with technology and systems and processes, and the problem isn't the technology. The conversion is from the behavior as well as the technology. Okay, so Connecting the pieces, so the 4 things I talked about today, your invisible patterns, right? Your perception filters, your 4 blind spots, and the calibrate diagnosis. Those were our 4 topics today. So your implementation for the next quarter, if you like, and this series, there's 8 sessions. Okay, complete your scorecard this week. Do it now, right? Run 1 brand audit to culture reality check. Do it for a month, right? It takes time. Set it up, get it out there. Not everybody's going to respond. You're going to need to follow up. So it takes time to do that. And then calibrate and, look at the transformation. We're going to talk about how to move that over the coming weeks. Okay. So some reflection for you, some questions you might want to ask yourself. Where is your organization confused its own narrative with reality? It's a really simple question. You might be asking it in your head, but you need to actually go out and measure it. Which of the 4 blind spots would your team be most resistant to measuring? Interesting question, right? And that will tell you that there's going to be some great telltales come out of that one, right? What data already exists that nobody is looking at honestly? We're kind of brushing it aside or doing what we do as humans, right? If you removed all those filters, what would you see that you currently don't? Okay, good questions, right? So before next session, just pick 1 blind spot. We're going to continue the exploration of expanding how you work through this. And remember, this is part of a workshop that we do with organizations so that you actually get to do this in a workshop environment with other people and sharing your experience with others. Next week, we'll look at decision bias, just like we did with the leadership side of things. The decision bias comes into play also when we're looking at the business side of things. So groupthink, confirmation bias, fallacies, anchoring, past successes, and so on. So we'll dive into that so that you can see the impact on the business. I can give you lots of tools on running your business successfully, your finances, your operations, your marketing. We've got marketing tools, we've got CRMs. We have a lot of tools, but the reality is always that people don't get success that they want to achieve. They get what they deserve because of the behavior, not because of the intention. Okay, so thank you again for joining me today. I hope you've had as much fun as I have with this. And it's just reality versus our own unconscious biases and filters. So next week, look forward to seeing you. In the meantime, have a great week and see you then. Take care.